Hello everyone, let us know where you're joining us from. So today it's a little bit a different setup. Alex is on vacation, so Adam and I are taking over the stream, hijacking the stream, to say so. If you're around, share where you're watching from, and if you have questions, please post them in the chat so that we can help and answer them. And I'll share the links that we'll use today in a second. Cool, and it's the top of the hour, so I think people probably start coming in, so I can start with the intros. So I'm Michael. I'm part of the developer relations group at Neo4j, and I'm joined by Adam today. Hey, Adam.
Yeah, hey everyone. My name is Adam. So I'm a member of the DevRel team with Michael, based in the UK, and I look after GraphAcademy, which is our online self-paced platform. Really, I'm only here today just to do some shameless promotion for one of the courses I've been working on recently.
Exactly, right. So and for those of you that have not checked out GraphAcademy, please do so. It's really awesome. The relaunch of GraphAcademy is really, really cool. Lots of interactivity, lots of good content. And also, if you don't need it yourself anymore, please show it to friends and colleagues and your grandma so that they can learn a little bit about graphs and Neo4j and Cypher and app development and so on. And so today we thought we don't look at the dataset as such, but we want to look at application development. So from that perspective, we thought, okay, Python is pretty popular, so let's pick the Python course from GraphAcademy, and Adam will walk us through it. I start a little bit with the intro bits, and then Adam takes it on for all the details. And if you have any questions in between, and we hope that we can actually code along. So let's try this, and we'll see how far we'll get as such. Okay, so what we want to do is look first at the dataset, which is the movies recommendation dataset, import it into AuraDB free, and then look a little bit at GraphAcademy and the courses there, and then look at the app that we want to build, the backend in Python. And I hope that we also have some time to look at the front end, which Adam wrote in Vue as well. And then if you have questions, feel free to just post them, and we are happy to answer them. So this is actually the links that I'll just paste into the chat right now so that you have them there and can use them directly. Let me do this. I hope this works. Yeah, so not as nicely formatted as on the screen, but at least you should be able to open the links. So this is where you go to AuraDB free, console.neo4j.io. The dataset is under Neo4j Graph Examples Recommendations on GitHub. GraphAcademy you find under graphacademy.neo4j.com. And there's also a Python course that we'll see. And then there's also the app, which we'll clone and look at as such. The dataset is a movie dataset, but much bigger than the one that we've usually used in Neo4j browser. It's a recommendation dataset. So originally it was built on a movie lens recommendation data. So there's a number of users of different sizes, basically with ratings, with real ratings for real movies. And so we took this dataset, and then for all the movies that were in this movie lens dataset, we pulled extra data like the genres, movie details, and person data from the MovieDB, and merged it all together into one graph database. And so as you can see, we have 670 users, 9,000 movies, and 1,400 or 20,000 people in total that acted or directed in these movies, and 20 genres. And that's the dataset that we're going to use for building our recommendation app. So if you go to this recommendations repository, you see the code, Neo4j Graph examples / recommendations. You can see code. There are also Cypher examples and more. But what we are interested in today is this data folder, which has these dump files, and we'll use these dump files to import them into Neo4j Aura. So in Aura, if you've been here before, you've seen this already. So you log in to Neo4j Aura with your account, and then you can create a new AuraDB free instance. You can call it whatever you want. I called it recommendations. I'll pick an location close to me, which is Belgium. And then I pick a blank database because we want to import the dump file anyway. So I click create database, then it tells me I have to save the password here. So please copy this to a safe location. You need this later for the app also to be able to connect to Neo4j. Click on continue, and then it takes a while for this to spin up. And while it's doing this, I'll show you how I continued. I basically downloaded this recommendations 4.3 dump file here from GitHub. Pretty quick into downloads. And then I, so it takes 2 or 3 minutes for the database to come up. And while it's doing this, I'll show you what I did next. Is basically you go onto the database tab, click on import database, and then you can select the dump file here. I just select the dump file that I uploaded and that I downloaded, and it will upload it really quickly. And then it takes a few minutes, again 3 minutes roughly, for the dump file to be available in your database. Right. And if you do this, then you basically see the data in your database, as I showed you before with the data model and so on. So we can look in a minute or two and see where we are with this. So please come along, and that would be really cool if you're making it and basically coding with us. So you see it currently says here loading, and when this changes to running, then we can open our database and then connect to it and look at it. Okay, while we're waiting for this, perhaps Adam, I don't know if you want to take over, so I'll switch to your screen and we can talk a little bit about GraphAcademy and what you can find there. So I'll disable mine. Did this work? So somehow we're now in...
Still on yours at the moment.
It's currently in your... you probably need to minimize the restream one or reshare your other screen.
Ah, okay.
Okay, cool. Super.
Here we go. Cool. Yeah, so so I've been working on GraphAcademy for the last year and a bit, really. So we had an old set of courses that were the content was great, but probably needed some kind of care and attention in terms of making them more interactive, more fun. So there's 2 of us at the moment working on this, plus help from people sort of both in the community and also inside Neo4j to help us put together some new courses. The idea is that they're kind of more fun, more hands-on and interactive courses. So we start off with a beginner's track, which based on the data that we've looked at in terms of how people use the site, these are the kind of things that everyone needs to know. So starting from, I know nothing about Neo4j at all, or graph databases, what they are. So you learn Neo4j fundamentals. And then that takes you through the process of what the database is. Then we look at how to query the database in Neo4j fundamentals, how to model a database, because this is a different process to sort of many other databases. And then we look at importing the data in there. From then we sort of branch out into different job roles. So we're kind of working on this course catalog at the moment. But what we're going to go through today is one on the developer track, which is all about building, basically implementing a UI. So for all of these courses inside the developer track, I've built a UI which all of these work with. And basically what happens is when you enroll to the course, you get to clone a repository, for example, like this one here, which has basically hard-coded API responses. So, for example, you look for a list of movies, it gives you the same 6 movies every time. As you work through the course, and as you go through the lessons, you learn everything that you need to know about the Neo4j driver, how it works, and how to integrate into your application. So we're going to do this on Neo4j Aura, but when you sign up, you get a free Neo4j sandbox instance that works for 3 days, and you can extend it up to 10 days. You then start to learn about the driver, what it is, how to install it, how to instantiate it, how to add it to your project. Learn all about sessions and transactions, how to process results, the Neo4j type system, and then the discrepancies between that and the program language that you're working in. And then you go through and work through practical examples of how to implement that through kind of like read and write transactions. And then there's a whole project backlog where you can go through and you can practice your skills. So the first lesson tells you to basically set up the project and clone a repository. So I've already done this offline, but basically this is the repository. So like I said, there's some hard-coded pieces in there that that return some basic information, and then we sort of go from there. So I've already cloned onto my local computer, and this is the project inside VS Code. So if we just take a quick look around the project. So basically everything is kind of hard coded, so you can also everything is built so you only change 2 of the files inside there. So what we'll do is we'll look at implementing the Neo4j driver and actually instantiating that driver inside the project is the first lesson. Then we'll go through and learn through these data access objects. We'll say, for example, for the movies, right now this returns a list of the same 7 movies from that data set. So Shawshank Redemption, Goodfellas, I think, is in there as well, which are all, I guess, like coincidentally my favorite movies that are in the data set. But what we'll do is we'll go through and we'll implement these one by one to use the driver that we've created, open a session, open a transaction, and go from there. Cool. Yeah. So as Michael said, I've already created an instance of my recommendations database in the same way that he's done it by uploading that dump file, and I've got the credentials set in there. So in the first lesson, what we do is we go through and we set up the project, and that involves copying over the .env file. So if we take a look in .env. So it has this sort of basic information there. So there are some credentials for connecting to Neo4j, and obviously these are different depending on how you're connecting. But these are the most important things. What we'll do is we'll read these in as we go through. Actually, so they're already read in. So in init.py, so you can see here. This information is read from that .env file, plus the secret key and a few other things there as well. So we're also saying that we want to run the Flask. So this is a Flask application. So Flask is a Python framework. But so that the course is all designed so it will teach you how to use the Neo4j driver in a way that is framework agnostic. So if you wanted to use this in the framework of your choice, then you can go and do that. And the nice thing about the 5 official drivers that we've got as well is the process is exactly the same for all of them. We do the same process, give or take a few little nuances depending on the languages, but we follow the same process.
Adam, do you have the app running somewhere so that people can see what it will look like in the end?
Yeah, I can start it. So once you've created your .env file and everything is set up, you can just run Flask run, and then that starts it for me on localhost port 3000. So this is the basic UI. So this is a hard-coded list of the first 6. The first 6 results, and then so the information is the same on both of these. So if we take a look in the network tab, we can see that there's a call to localhost 3000/API/movies with some extra URL parameters in order to set the ordering and things like that. So we can read that as we go through. That just gives us back a list of JSON. And yeah, it just basically gives us information, the hard-coded information that we need to read. Cool. Okay. Cool. So there's lots of read queries in there. So, for example, getting the list of movies, getting a list of actors, and things like that. So we can get a list of people. And you can also sign in and register as well, which is a way of creating data. So we'll look at how to write data to the database and also to save ratings there as well. So we're showing both read and write inside this. Cool. So should we jump into the first task, Michael?
Yeah, let's do this. So, by the way, if you hadn't seen, so Adam had shown the env.example file so far, but the actual credentials are in the .env file, right? So the one that is one up, so right in the repository. Yep. You have to copy it over, so it doesn't exist in the repository, but you have to copy the env.example over and change the credentials, and they put in the password as well. The rest can stay unchanged. Yeah, let's do the first one, and perhaps yeah, and then we can run the tests and see if it actually works to connect to Neo4j.
Yeah, sounds good. So if you get stuck at any point, what you can do is you can check out the individual branch as well, if necessary. You may need to stash some changes or something in order to get to that point because of merge conflicts. But in theory, you can go through and you can check it out at any point if necessary. Cool. Okay. So yeah, the first lesson there is to create an instance of the driver. So we do that inside Neo4j.py. So inside the API folder, there's a file called Neo4j.py. So there's lots of to-dos in this repository. So there's 38 there at the moment. So 38 different tasks that you need to do basically. So maybe a few more in order to
yeah. But the course walks you through all the things step by step, so you don't have to be afraid of these many tasks, because kind of we take one at a time basically, and also many of them are in the extended backlog, in the optional backlog. That's not mandatory to do.
Yeah. Yeah, so the driver is available from wherever you get your dependencies from.
Yeah, PyPy, right?
Yeah, PyPy. Yeah, so we can install it using pip. Is it PyPy? Right.
Mm-hmm.
PyPy.
Yeah.
PyPy.
And then there you can just search for Neo4j driver.
Yeah, so it's under Neo4j driver there. So we can just run pip install to install that. So I think I've already got it installed, but if I do pip install Neo4j driver, then that will load the dependency for me. All good. And those warnings are down to my setup, I think, rather than anything else. So once we've got that dependency installed, we can import what we need to in there. So I've already got the import in here. So from the Neo4j package, we're importing this graph database class. So that class has got some static methods on there in order to create certain things. So for example, we can create the driver. So inside the lesson, we do it inside this init driver function. So that init driver function is then called by, is called when the app starts. So in init.py. So we call init driver there with the URI, username, and password. So the credentials for Neo4j. And and then we then use the reference to from current app, which is exported by Flask to actually get that value back. So in here, what I can do is I can say that the current app.driver is graph database driver. So this the first argument here is the URI, which is what we've got passed through into the function. And then we can set auth, which is so in our case, it's going to be a basic authentication, which is username and password. So we can pass this as a tuple. So we say username, password, and then we can return that as the value through. So another thing that we can do at this point is we can use the verify connectivity function to verify that the connection is successful with those credentials. Because if you say, for example, you create an instance of the driver, your app is running, but then the error doesn't come until like a user actually tries to execute a query, then that could cause an issue. So we can verify at this point that the connection is successful.
So it would fill at startup and not just when the first request comes in, right? So which is good. Actually, I learned about verified connectivity only from the course. I hadn't seen that before. So I'm not sure if that's a recent addition, but it's really super useful to check that the connection is correct.
Yeah, so one thing that it will do is it will give you a warning here, which says that this feature is sorry if I a bit, that the feature is experimental. So I've had a chat with the people in know about this, and the response was, "Don't worry, it's not going anywhere. If anything, it's going to be made unexperimental." Is that would that be the term? I don't know. Yeah, it's
production or permanent. Okay. I moved us to the side so that people can see your screen hopefully a little bit better. So let us know if that works for you, folks viewing. So Adam doesn't have to scroll around with the terminal.
Cool.
So you can probably also move it to the bottom or however you want to do it.
Okay. Cool. So now that we've done that, so as you go through the course, there's like a set of tests that you can run to verify that you've completed certain things. So in this one, it just I think this one just trusts you. But if we look in the test folder, there's one test per challenge that you have inside the course. So the first one is connect to Neo4j. So what this is doing is it's testing that the environment variables are set. It's testing that with the app context that the driver which is set in here, so current app.driver is not none. So if you didn't write the code, then that wouldn't be set. It's testing that you can get the driver using the getDriver function, and then testing that it can close the driver, and then once you close the driver, none is returned, which is just what happens inside the inside that function.
Cool.
So if I now run PyTest, and so I want to run test / and then o1 connect to Neo4j test.py. So I'll go through, and again, this is going to give us some warnings because of the experimental feature, but we've got 4 tests pass in there. So that's great.
Super.
So
first challenge solved. So we have a driver now. Super. And that enables us now to do more fun things, right? So to read and write data to database and have the API endpoints solve and serve things. Right?
Yep, definitely.
So do you want to talk about like the application structure, like routes and services, and how this all goes together, or how do you want to go to the next step?
So I mean, let's take.
Or perhaps you can take a later branch and then look at that and see what it's doing. Yeah. Also, I don't know what.
So what I'll do is I'll go through the basically the process for adding the data to the homepage. So at the moment, these two lists are hard coded. So there's just the values are defined in one of the files, and then just sent out. So what we need to do instead is to use that driver to query Neo4j in order to kind of get that data out. So as I mentioned before, there's a API request here that goes to /API/movies with some additional URL search parameters in there. So if we look in the code, inside here we have some blueprints. So these are kind of like a blueprint is the Flask definition of a set of routes. So if we look in the movie routes, this is where the code is defined. So we've got this movie routes thing. So this is what Flask needs in order to set those routes up. And then what you do is you use these annotations to set the different route handlers. And so this is our route handler for the movie list. So it's extracting some information from the request arguments. So we've got the sort, order, limit, and skip there. So that's the things that change our query. We try and get the user ID from the current identity, so we don't need to worry too much about that at the moment. But basically, once a user signs in, there's an extra piece of information added there to see whether the movie is within the user's favorite list. Because one of the features that you implement a little bit later on is to send an API request to mark a movie as the user's favorite, and then it creates a relationship between the user and the movie.
Yeah, that's actually a really nice aspect of the course. It also teaches about user management and auth tokens and stuff like that. So that's something that's oftentimes underserved in example apps, but I really like that you added this item to all the apps so that we can see how do you properly manage users and their account information, but also their activities and favorites and stuff like that. And then have proper auth tokens as well so that they are verified with an auth provider. But it's probably too much and too detailed to do it today in a live stream, but it's all in the course and you can learn how to do user management with Neo4j, where Neo4j also stores your user information and secure passwords and all these other things as such.
Yep, definitely. So we then create an instance of this movie DAO, so movie data access object, and then we pass the driver through to that class. So that's available for the duration of that class. And then basically the magic happens inside this all method. So you pass through the different parameters that we've got from the URL in order to affect that query basically. So if we take a look here, so at the moment there's a to-do there, and then it just returns the list of popular actors from this data.py. So what we want to do is to use the driver, which is available as self.driver, in order to firstly open up a session and then run a query inside a read transaction. So what we need to do with the driver, so for every single request, you would open a session. So we could say with self.driver.session a session. We can then do something inside there. So basically, a session is a how would you describe a session, Michael? Like
so it's kind of it's kind of a short-lived connection to the database. It's not really a connection, so like a TCP connection, but like a logical connection to the database that lives throughout, let's say, the processing of a request. And within a session, you can have multiple transactions, but they all together form kind of in request-sized, basically, logical connection to the database, and which handles stuff like return writes and stuff like that on that level. And also you select which database do I connect to as part of a session creation, right? So if you have multi-database, then you can choose which database you actually want to connect to with that session. And Yeah, and within the session, then you can run transactions, which are then the actual units of work that are rollbackable or retriable and are like self-contained operations of the data on a database as such. Yeah, so I would call it kind of like a logical database connection, not like the physical TCP connection, because that's kind of can go away and join because that's kind of stateless from our perspective, but more like a logical connection.
Yeah. Yeah, and so these sessions are kind of lightweight, aren't they? So they can be brought up and sort of closed down at any point. So basically, by using the with keyword, it means that the session is closed and all resources are released at the end of this execution of this block of code. So that's quite handy. And then, so as Michael said, inside a session, we can run a transaction. So we do that by calling session read transaction in this case, or we can also call write transaction. And so both of these need a unit of work, which is basically a function. And there's some extra parameters in there as well, but we don't need to worry too much about those. What we need to do is to define like a unit of work, something that needs to be executed inside the read transaction. So what we can do is we can say that or create a new definition for a new function. Let's call this get movies. So when you call something within this read transaction, the first parameter that gets passed through is the transaction object. So we can use that transaction object to execute queries, and we do that with tx.run. In this case, what we need to do is to run a Cypher query, and bear with me while I copy this from the lesson. We've got the transaction there. We need the sort, order, limit, skip, and then the user ID values.
And the other ones are then basically just passed on behind the function name, right? For the session.read transaction.
Yep. So we can just.
Cool. So it automatically passes them on the other ones that are not. Cool.
Yeah. Yeah. So we've got. So this is the Cypher query that we need to run. So what we're doing here is we're saying find me all of the movie nodes inside the database where the first value exists, so the sort value, because when you sort something in Neo4j and the value doesn't exist on certain nodes, then they become like they're first in the order before anything with the value in there. And then we're returning so all properties of the movie ordered by that first value, and then the second value is either going to be ascending or descending depending on the value. We then call tx.run in order to execute that. So the first parameter, the required parameter, is the Cypher query, and then we can pass through name parameters as Cypher parameters. So this would be anything that is prefixed with a dollar sign, so skip. That then relates to that skip there. And then, so now we've got the result, we can then extract the values from there. So the easiest way to do that yep.
Should we try to run this query against the browser database to show kind of what results it's returning?
Yeah,
such?
sure.
So that people, it's called query now on top. Yeah. So it's a like redesign to confuse users a little bit.
Cool. So I'll take my password there and lock that in.
And so everything except for the ordering should be possible to handle with browser params, right?
Yep. So where are we? We're in movies.py. So that's our query there. So I'll replace the Cypher things. So let's say we order it by title. We'll do that in ascending order.
Mm-hmm.
So if I run that now, it's going to tell me that, oops, sorry, double brackets, which is Python as well. So that's going to tell me there's 2 parameters missing. So I can say,
actually, there's a new feature. Can you see that? Where there's the link? If you click this, it actually
okay.
offers you. So they just added this feature. So that's a quick help for browser to. Nice. Now we can rerun our query.
So that's not going to work on because they're integers.
Ah, okay, good point.
Limit 10. So if for anybody that's interested, if you do the JavaScript course, it tells you exactly why this happens with integers and floats. Basically, there's a discrepancy between integers in JavaScript, which the Neo4j browser is written in, and the Neo4j type system, which is Java. Cool. So if you run
basically it turns them into floating point numbers by default, whatever's in the JSON, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is what we would see as the results from the API endpoint, basically coming back, right?
Yep. Yep. So we've got all the information there for cats, and then the second one is $9.99. Hellboy. So that's applying the ordering, but it's the special characters are there coming first.
I mean, we could also sort by IMDb rating or something like that, right? So if you wanted to like descending or so, then
IMDb rating is the actual the thing you need to do to pass the lesson.
Okay.
IMDb rating
descending probably, right? Or otherwise, it's the trash movies that come first.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Cool.
So the top one should be Brand Brothers. So if anyone trying to do the first lesson, this is the answer to that. So the
to the course quiz. Good. So if you watch the live stream, then you're one step ahead.
Yeah, there's a hint there for you.
Cool. So this means kind of our self-query structure is correct, and basically, and the only frustrate or the little bit involved bit is kind of that you can't pass in sort fields and stuff like that as as parameters.
Yep. So just a little bit that needs to be done there. So now we've got the results held inside this result object. So we just need to extract those out. So we can say return, and we can use like a list comprehension for this. So we can say if we say we've got 4 row in result, we want something on there. So for each row, there's a value method, which gives you the value of whatever is returned. So because we've got movie returning the properties of M as movie, we can then return that, and then that gives us basically the list of 10. Cool.
So and then we return whatever comes from there to the main method, right? So.
Yep. Yeah. So because we're returning all of the values inside there, we can just say return get movies with these values passed in. So it'll go through, it will run that retransaction, it will run the unit of work, do everything it needs to inside the transaction, then it will commit itself. Cool. So if I now, fingers crossed, if I refresh homepage, I'll load the homepage again. We have, okay, it's just a bit slow. Cool. So this is now the values ordered by the most popular movies. So ordered by the TMDB rating. And then we've got the latest releases, so ordered by the release date. So Solace is the latest one there. And then Band of Brothers is the highest rated. Yeah, obviously that's not the latest movie that's come out, it's just the latest one inside the data set. So in order to verify that we've passed the test completely, what I can do is I can run PyTest again. So we want tests O2, O2, movie list test. Go through and run the test inside the suite. So test is the pagination work, so the limits that they work. A test that the ordering is correctly implemented. So if we order by IMDb rating in ascending and descending order, they should be different values. And then
different skip and limit values as well. Right?
Using the skip as well.
Cool.
And then so you can see that this bit here is the output that's been printed. So when you do this test in GraphAcademy, you just need to copy and paste this value here with Band of Brothers into the text box. Hit I can't remember what the button name is. Hit submit, and then it should tell you that you've passed the test.
Cool, nice. So that looks actually quite straightforward, right? So kind of connecting to database, running the query, getting the results back, and then returning it. Did you get any comments from Pythonistas if they prefer like these inner functions versus lambdas, or?
So I guess lambdas are. There's like a love-hate relationship with lambdas in Python. So it's a little bit iffy as to what you need to do. So the problem that I found with using lambdas in these transaction functions is that everything needs to be all on one line, so it makes one line really long.
It only allows one Python statement to say so in there, right? Not multiple Python statements. So you can do like backslashes to wrap it, but that's about it, right? So it's not very, very, very nice as such. So that's different from like JavaScript or Java, where enclosures or lambdas, you can just have as much code as you want to, right? And cool, but otherwise it's pretty straightforward, right? And then you can extract the data from the results that you need and return it. And then it's probably just turned into JSON in the route, right? And then return to the. So that means if we open the URL, the movies API backend again, then it should give us the. So and this is coming now from the real database, right? So that's the real data, not the fixture.
Yep, and we can say like skip. It's 6. So then we get the next 6 results. So then we've got Frozen Planet. Pride and Prejudice, Making a Murderer.
Some of the cards in the UI didn't show any posters. Were there like just posters missing for these, or? Okay,
there's just incomplete data there.
Okay, so we could just, for instance, also exclude the ones that have no posters from the, if we wanted to, just have always visible stuff.
Yep, that's it. Cool. Yeah, so that's a read transaction. So the next lesson is all about registering a user and doing that inside a write transaction. So if we go back to the UI, so if you click register at the top, then you can fill out a name, you can fill out an email address, and you can fill out a password. And register there. So basically what happens here is when you submit that request, you go through to the auth blueprint and the post route for register. The email, password, and name values are extracted from the form data. We then create an instance of the auth data access object with the driver, and then some config for the secret key. So this is what is used to sign the JWT tokens, but let's not go into too much detail about that. And then the register method is called. So right now, if the email isn't graphacademy.neo4j.com, it throws an error, so it's hard-coded there. So you can only register graphacademy.neo4j.com.
That's what we saw in the UI, right? The error message.
Yeah, so an account already exists with the email address value that you provided. And so if it's not, then it generates the JWT token and kind of goes from there. So we'll go through and we'll implement this so you can see the the difference or the similarities between the two. So we've already got an encrypted password, which means that we're not storing plain text passwords in the database. So again, what we would do is if we take out this this to do, and then if we comment those out for now, we want to create another unit of work. So in this case, let's say create user. So the first parameter that's passed through there is always the transaction. And then we want the email, we want the encrypted the password, we want the name. And then, so this is one that we can use a Lambda for. So let's use a Lambda for this one instead, actually. So if we say with
driver, or this driver,
driver dot session as session, we can say user is, so we do session dot write transaction. And then we pass through the cipher, and I'm hoping this will let me do this.
I mean, we can also pass through, or we can also define the cipher outside just as a variable, so that we just call statement or something like that, right? Or,
yeah. So we want to do tx.run on that cipher query. Is that?
Yeah, looks okay to me.
Cool. So we want to create a user with a user ID of so we call the random UUID function.
That's in Cypher, yeah.
Cypher,
but you have to watch out for the spelling, right? So because it's case sensitive, so I spend lots of time finding the right spelling for random user UUID.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Name, and then we want to return the user.
But we could choose to just return the user ID, email, and name, and not a password, right? If you wanted to, or we can do it outside as well. So that's kind of up to us.
Yeah. So in this one, I'll return the user object so you can see how to access the property of there. But because we're only expecting one row to be returned, we can use the single rather than using list comprehension.
Yeah.
So that gives me the first row.
Actually, it returns whenever there's like not exactly one row, it throws an error. So if there's more than one, or if there's like less than one. So which is actually quite nice when you say I expect exactly one result, that it actually errors when. Cool.
And then we want to get the U value there basically. So this transaction we run with a Lambda. And then give us basically the user node, which we can extract this this payload info from.
Yeah.
So in order to access a
and we have to pass the parameters, right? To the Lambda, to the right transaction.
Yeah. So email. What do we call that? Encrypted. And
name, right?
Name.
And then we have also to pass the cipher params to inside of the Lambda, right? So.
Yeah. Okay, so we don't need to add them there. We just need to do them inside the tx.run.
Yeah, that's true.
Because they're available inside that function.
Yeah, true.
Cool. So we've got this user node there. So what we can do is say use the square brackets to extract the node, the value from the node. So we say user ID there. We can do that with those values, and then that gives us the same payload, which is then used to generate the token.
Yeah.
So I'm really hoping this one works.
And the token generation is done by an auth library, right? So auth0 or something else that then takes care of that.
Yep. So the token is generated by so it's Flask JWT is the library. So basically, you just need to pass through a payload, a secret, and then the algorithm stuff to do that. And then I'll show you what that token looks like. once it's done. So we've done that. We can then run the test. So there's a O3 register and user test. So if I run that and then cross my fingers.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it's failed. Run takes from 2 to 3. Okay. Oh, okay, so the so email equals email. These need to be
okay. KW args, kind of named args, right?
Yeah.
Or a map, I think. Looks as well.
Map. Cool. So one
Yay!
pass. So that's good. So if we look in the database, we're going to have loads of users in there. But if we say where exists n.user ID. No, sorry. So this is the old.
No, they were just parentheses. Yeah.
Cool. Oh, they've all got a user ID in there.
So then use ended password or something like that, right?
Ah, yeah. Yeah, so that's our the GraphAcademy user, which is created during the test.
Mm-hmm.
The user ID is there, and then so a random generated GUID, and then the email address. So now if we submit this form again across my fingers. Okay, so it's signed in. So it signed me in as Adam. So if I just refresh that query, then there I am.
Super. Cool. So that's really neat. And then as soon as we have the user, then we can do stuff with the user, right? So we can basically manage favorites and other things, ratings and other things as well, which is really cool. So all these other features that are enabled by the user are then possible, essentially.
Yeah. So should we quickly go through the favorites list, just so like we've got sort of 9 minutes left, but
yeah, we have a few minutes left. By the way, if there are any questions from people watching, feel free to let us know if you want to see something specific in the code as such. Otherwise, if there are no questions, then I think, favorite list sounds like a really good idea.
Okay. And hey, Anthony as well. How's it going?
Yeah, hey, Anthony.
Cool. Okay. So yeah, we'll basically do the same thing for saving the favorites. So my favorites list. So that is in the auth DAO, I think. Oh no, so the favorites DAO. So everything is should be quite easily named. So again, we've got the driver pass through as the one of the arguments of the constructor, and then we can add it in there. So right now it's hard coded to return Goodfellas. So now that I'm logged in. On every one of these cards now, there's that little bookmark icon. So by clicking that should then give you or it should add the movie to your favorites. But right now that's hard coded.
Mm-hmm.
So if we go to favorite movies, sorry, latest releases. So I'll just go and add one of these to my favorites. So if I check this one out, actually, just to make it a little bit quicker.
Yeah, so there's branches, and if you look at the repository, then there are branches for each of the tasks, and so you can also quickly switch to the next branch if you get lost or if something is not working. Then you can also just look at the next branch what the right solution would be, and then you can also, or you can compare the next branch to your solution so in Git and see how it's doing.
Yep. So when I click the bookmark, if we go into the network, so a post request is sent to localhost 2000 API account favorites and then the movie ID. So then that goes through to the add method here. So again, we're doing exactly the same thing where we define a unit of work, which is this bit here. We run this function in order to get the the user by the user ID and the movie by the movie ID, and then create the relationship between the two, and then setting a created at timestamp on there, so we know when the user created that relationship. And then as well as returning information about the movie, we also return this favorite flag.
Yeah.
So that's going to be important in a second, but for now, let's
okay.
let's go with that.
There was one question, Adam, about lifecycle for sessions in Python. So I guess something that we discussed a little bit at the beginning, kind of how long does the session live? Should it be long-lived? Should it be short-lived? And it's kind of, I don't know how you see it, but I think from my perspective, it would be kind of request-lived, right? So for like a request, you create a session and then use that as such, right? And
yeah.
Or what do you think?
Yeah, so I tend to open one up basically per request. So as you can see, like inside these classes, for each one of the methods, it would be called once inside an API request. But really, they're kind of a lightweight thing, so you can create as many, close as many as you want. I think, like you said earlier about bookmarks, if you want to read your own write within the same query call, then you can use that. Otherwise, don't be scared to kind of open them and close them whenever you need to.
Yeah, that's actually a good point, right? So imagine you use within a request multiple DAOs and you run against a cluster. Then you might end up writing to the cluster with one part of the request. And then when you create a new session for the remaining parts for the request, it might be routed to a read replica. And then your update might not be there yet as such, depending on your setup and sizes and so on. So I wonder actually if that's also a sensible pattern to actually create the session in the route and then pass the actual session to all the services or DAOs as such, and then they would kind of share the session in the in either in the method or in the constructor as such, right? So that's the other option. It's also something I was thinking about. For instance, lifetime of DAOs, right? Are they kind of lightweight and do you throw them away, or do they stick around? I guess that depends also on what other resources they use as such, right? So
yeah. So in like the in Python itself, like the as everything kind of passes through the life cycle of the request, the DAO only exists for the lifetime of that request. But they're kind of designed to kind of follow the patterns of the other languages that they're kind of that they can be treated as like singletons. So you could have one instance of that within the app, because you have one instance of the driver per app. One instance of the driver per Neo4j instance or cluster that you're connecting to per app. So yeah, you would only, in theory, because you pass that through to the constructor, you'd only need to do that once when the application starts. But then you've got certain memory that's being used up, sort of holding that class. And it even comes down to like there may be a point where you might want to pass through the transaction to these functions because you want to, so for example, read the user's information. You want to create a relationship between a user and a movie, and then you want to find some more information to return as part of that API request. You may want to do all that inside the same transaction. So there may be the case that you open up a session and then or create a new transaction, which you then pass through to each one of these classes to then use. So I was kind of wrestling with the thought of doing that in these courses, but maybe a little bit of overkill. But definitely, for example, in GraphAcademy itself, there are certain routes and certain route handlers that need to do more than one thing inside a transaction. So there's like, for example, when you complete a course, complete a lesson, it also has to check whether you complete the module in the course. So those things are kind of, I mean, you could do them in one cipher query.
Dependent, they're dependent, like one unit of work. You want them to be either all done or none of them done, right? Especially if they write to the database, you don't want to have like partial updates in the database, which then have to be fixed if if the second or third operation fails, you want it all to basically roll back and then retry it or something like that, right? So
Yeah.
good point.
Yeah, and if you're doing that inside like 3 or 4 different transactions, then like you're hammering the database when you don't necessarily need to. So yeah, you could have like per request have one transaction. Yeah, so
yeah, really good question. Really good question, actually. What kind of where should you kind of keep the session and where should you keep the driver as such, right? The driver is definitely a singleton across the app, but the session, perhaps it even makes sense to think about moving the session to the route level, right? So when a route calls multiple, especially, I think in this app, each route calls exactly one DAO, so it's not such a big deal. But if an route were to call multiple DAOs to achieve something, then especially for read your own writes, it might be actually sensible to pass the session to all the DAOs or their methods, depending on the language.
Yep.
Really good question. Thank you, Arya.
Cool. Yeah, so we've got that unit of function there. Sorry, unit of work there to create the relationship, and then inside a session we call a write transaction to save that. So that then just returns the values there, and then yeah. So actually, so interesting going on from the conversation we had about transactions and what you should do inside a transaction. The next lesson on top of this is to get the list of favorites for a user. So right now there's no info there. Well, there's a 500 internal error there, which I promise I will fix, but let's ignore that for now. But there's something is none there. But so if we look inside the movies DAO, so if we like get the list of all movies, what we want to do is add like a flag to that to find the to find whether that movie is part of the user's favorites. So if I just check out the 8 branch, there's some changes that kind of happen there. So there's this get user favorites function, which if the user is logged in and that user ID value is set, then it should return an array of IDs for the users. The movies that the user is favorited. Yeah. So basically, that just returns a big a list of strings, which then gets passed through. So inside the unit of work for get movies, instead what we're doing is we're calling that get user favorite. So that needs the transaction and then the user ID, and then that will give me an array of strings or an empty array if the user's not logged in. And then we populate the favorite field by checking to see whether the TMDB ID property of the movie is in that favorites list. So that's a kind of a case where you could do 2 things inside the same transaction. You don't need 2 sessions for that. You shouldn't create 2 sessions. You shouldn't create 2 transactions for that. They should all be done inside the same kind of unit of work. So that would be how you would do it.
Cool. This is really good. Thank you so much, Adam. So I think we are almost out of time, but if you want to try this yourself, we share the repository. But of course, the easiest way to go through this is to actually go to Graph Academy and take the course. So there's building applications with Python. There's the same for Node.js and Go existing as well. So if you're working with JavaScript or Node or TypeScript, you can go for the JavaScript one. If you're using Go, go for the Go one. And we're currently finishing up the Java one, and the .NET course will be next.
Yeah, and I'd like to highlight as well this free offer. So if you complete this course or the Node.js course by the 22nd of April, then I'm more than happy to send you out a free T-shirt. So in order to do that, complete the course, share it on the social media of your choice, share it on LinkedIn, add it as a certification on LinkedIn, share on Twitter, anything using the Graph Academy hashtag. Drop us an email, and then I will send you a link to fill in your details.
Yeah, And they're really beautiful, these t-shirts. So really cool. It's a one of a kind. So if you do this, then you get them as well. Super, and there are lots of other Graph Academy courses as well, and more coming. So in the next few days, there should be a few more courses being added as well to Graph Academy. And so please check those out as well. We'll also publish blog posts about them as well. And otherwise, next week we are back with Alex, but I'd love to do another one or two with you, Adam, looking at the different courses and seeing what we do there and how people can take them, and because it's quite cool to have these really interactive courses with a lot of exercise quizzes and interactive incremental completion of the course, which is really good.
Yeah, that's
so. Thank you so much, Adam. And if no one has other questions, then thank you all for watching. This will be also recorded on YouTube, so you can watch this later. If you missed this, or if you want to share this session with someone, feel free to check our YouTube playlist. And I can put in cover. Here we also have a page on neo4j.com, which actually gives you all the data sets, all the sessions as well that we've done in the past. So I just pasted this into the chat, so you should see that as well. Cool. Thank you all. Especially thank you, Adam, for taking the time today and showing all these things. And have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.